Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
One of the major stories over the past 3 months has been the deaths of leaders on the political and religious right. Of course, most of the conversation this past month has surrounded the death of Charlie Kirk, but it hasn't just been Kirk. In July, perhaps the most influential conservative evangelical complementarian Calvinist preacher of the past century passed away in John MacArthur. Then in August, the founder of Focus on the Family, James Dobson, passed. And finally, on September 25th, the Southern Baptist evangelist and theologian Voddie Baucham died. Each of these men promoted hierarchical views of Christianity that placed men at the top, women in a subservient role beneath them, and children at the bottom. So while their theology and teaching caused a lot of harm to people of different races and ethnicities, to women, and to LGBTQ people, they especially caused harm to children. So for today's episode, I sat down with child liberation theologian R.L. Stoller. He's the author of The Kingdom of Children, A Liberation Theology, and you can follow him online at his website, rlstoller.com. But before we get into the interview, I wanted to share a more personal reflection related to the topic. I also grew up on the underside of the hierarchies that were built by these men, and the wounds run deep. One of the ways I've processed my hurt over the years has been through music. In fact, the voiceover in the introduction to this podcast mentions that I'm a writer, poet, and musician. In addition to leading worship in these churches for 20 years, I've also written a lot of songs. While I've focused my writing in recent years more on articles for Baptist News Global or on my upcoming book, I've produced songs under the name Provoke Wonder, which you can listen to wherever you stream your music. And a couple years ago, I wrote a song called Dear Church, where I directly addressed the church about the wounds they caused me during my childhood and how that affects my lack of trust in the church with my own children. So I'd like to share that song here, and then after the song finishes, we'll get right into the interview with R.L. Stoller.
First song was an old familiar hymn called Nothing But the Blood, but now it feels like the only one that's bleeding here is me. I was only 4, you said I'd forever burn unless I prayed a prayer and really meant the words. So I prayed it every single day like I'd never prayed before. And oh, the fear was crippling. You held your grip on me. You kept me up at night and haunted all my dreams. Yet still I trusted you were somehow looking out for me. If I wanted to feel good, discovering myself. And so I learned to act like I was not feeling the things I felt. I was 22 when I sold myself to you, put my whole career on hold so I could share your truth. But now I'm broke at 38 and I feel totally invisible to you. And oh, the fear was crippling. You held your grip on me. You kept me up at night and haunted all my dreams. Yet still I trusted you were somehow looking out for me. But what if somehow looking out for me. And oh, the fear was crippling. You held your grip on me. You kept me up at night and haunted all my dreams. Yet still I trusted you were somehow looking out for me. Now my kids are young, learning how to sing, trying to find their way. They're beautiful and free. Now you're asking me to trust you with their wings. Are you kidding me?
We've recently received news of the deaths of John MacArthur, James Dobson, and Voddie Baucham, all of whom promoted violent theologies that harmed kids. And yet, for some reason, our parents chose to follow their teaching about how to treat their children. So I'm curious, why did our parents choose to hurt their children by following the teaching of these men that they likely never even met?
I think that's a great question. And I think there's obviously a lot of different reasons. People have varying reasons for why they're attracted to people who teach authoritarian, abusive parenting. I guess I'll focus on a couple. I think probably the most important is that most, if not all of these parenting teachers describe their systems or ways of parenting as not just a option, but it was the biblical option. They, and their books are very explicit about their systems being based in the Bible, based on what they saw as the only way to interpret the Bible. And so that creates this very high standard that many parents feel like they have to follow, because if they're not following it, then they could potentially be going against the word of God itself. So I think that's one really significant factor. And I think the other would be related to that, which is that all these teachers also, in addition to saying that their systems or beliefs were biblical or the biblical way to do things, they also linked their systems with an inherent threat to those parents, which is that if they don't parent this way, if they don't follow these teachers and do the biblical way of parenting, then their children are going to end up as criminals, or, at worst, they will end up in hell, suffering eternal damnation. So all of these teachers are not only saying that, my way is the way, but they're also making parents very afraid of the consequences of what would happen if they don't follow them.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of fear there in the parents. And I know, like, for me, there was also a lot of fear, especially when it came to the physical violence of spanking. And
Hmm.
like our moms would say, wait till your dad gets home. And then our dads would say, this is going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you. And I feel like looking back, it feels like that by saying that, they were betraying the fact that they had no awareness of the spiritual harm their view of parenting was going to be causing, especially when it's compounded with the fear of hell or the rapture. And like, because I remember being told about hell at age 4 for my bedtime story, while my 2-year-old brother
Same.
was in the room. So it's like, what does being threatened with eternal conscious torment in hell do to 4-year-olds?
So that's a great question. I mean, it does a lot. It does a lot of damage. I think that probably the most significant that I can think of is that when you're told, when you're, 3 or 4 or 5 or however young you are, that the things that you're doing justify you being tormented forever, that makes you associate things that are just normal parts of child development with this idea that I am a evil, broken person who deserves hell for those things. Um, I think a really good example of this comes from an otherwise really great book by Rachel Den Hollander. She wrote a book called What is a Girl Worth? It's about her story of facing Larry Nassar and the abuse in the gymnast world. And at one point in the book, she has this section, and it's supposed to be a positive story. It's supposed to be this example of how faithful and religious her mother was in teaching the children about the gospel. So it's supposed to be something good. But what the story is that Rachel was a young kid. I think it's like around 4 or 5. And as many kids do, she was fascinated with toilet paper rolls. She would take the toilet paper off the roll, leave a big pile in the bathroom. And at one point, her mother told her not to do that. And Rachel did it anyways. And her mom, you know, confronted her, saying, I told you not to do this. And then her mom turned this moment into a teaching lesson about the gospel. Told Rachel that, this is an example of you sinning and why you need Jesus. So it was supposed to be something good in her mind, but I actually thought it was horrifying. Like, you know, kids like to experiment and play with the world around them. So, pulling toilet paper off a toilet paper roll is a very normal thing for a kid to do. For a child to be told not to do something that's pretty innocuous, annoying, but innocuous, and then to do it again is also a very normal part of child development. Like, children are given boundaries and by the adults or parents in their lives, and then they test those boundaries. That's just a part of being a child. So for Rachel to connect those moments with this idea that I'm evil, I'm broken, I need God, or I'm going to hell, what that's really communicating to parents and children is that these normal parts of life are indicative of me being evil. And that is going to create all sorts of fear, because when you're a child and you're told that you're inherently broken and sinful, you don't know what parts of your emotions or what parts of your experiences are normal versus ones that are supposed to be thinking things that make you afraid of yourself or make you think that you're bad. And when you start associating both of those together, that creates a lot of damage for children and a lot of fear throughout their life.
Yeah, I feel like for me, when I look back on those memories, a lot of like stories like that, I think what makes me the most sad about them is that they were they were doing spiritual violence to my identity.
Hmm.
And it's like I'm thinking about, Voddie Baucham in particular when he talked about how like babies were vipers in diapers. And
Yes.
he
Yeah.
um he would talk about how if babies had their way, they would violently murder their parents. Like that's saying something about the identity of babies. John MacArthur talked about how babies are so evil that abortion is how God plans to fulfill the Great Commission of having people from every nation, tribe, and tongue in heaven. And yet, if the children are born and they get older beyond that age of accountability, and submit to evangelical theology, then suddenly their identity shifts to being in Jesus and they're declared perfectly righteous. And God looks at them and actually sees Jesus instead. And somehow that's a good thing. So like, I'm curious how you hear I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how these scripts of identity may harm kids.
Yeah. So there's a section in one of Baucham's books. I don't remember which one it is at the moment, but at one point, Baucham talks about how parents should address their kids fighting. So he has a story of one of his kids has a toy, and the other kid takes the toy that doesn't belong to that person. And Baucham comes in and he encounters the kids fighting. And he decides that this moment is a teaching moment. And so he sits his kids down and he doesn't actually ask them like what happened. And in his story narrative, he doesn't ask them what happened. He doesn't ask the kids individually or together. Uh, what he does is he just sits them down and tells them, this moment of conflict between the two of you is because of sin. It's because you're not right with God. And Baucham tells this equally to both of the children. And when I read that passage, it was very disturbing to me, because I think it's that sort of script of identity, telling people that you're sinful and this is what's causing the problems around in your life. It does two things. The first is that it creates victims of abuse. And by this, I mean that when that child that had the toy that was taken from them is sat down and is told, this event happened because you are both sinful and we're not assigning responsibility or accountability to anyone. We're not getting to the root of the issue. We're not going to create justice in this moment. We're just making it a blanket statement about how both are sinful. What that's telling the child that was wronged is that I am experiencing evil because I'm evil. And so that is teaching that child to be accustomed to experiencing bad things in their lives and linking those to their selves or their soul or their body or mind being a bad thing. And so when bad things happen to you, you're not going to fight. You're not going to push back. You're not going to speak up because that's what you deserve. You deserve bad things. That's just conditioning that child to be a victim. And I don't mean that in like a complaining sort of victim. I mean an actual someone who's being victimized and not able to have agency or voice to speak out about their experiences. The second thing that that script does is that it conditions the other child to be an abuser. Because when I do something wrong and I am told, this isn't because you're hungry or you're tired or you're selfish or this or that, like in this specific moment, you're told you're doing these things because you're evil, then that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if I'm told that I'm doing these evil things because the core of me can't do anything different, that can cause children to just be like, okay, well then I guess I'll continue down this path towards, something more serious than taking someone's toy. But it's essentially creating a kind of like a sociopathic perspective in that child because they aren't learning empathy. They're not learning the skills to regulate themselves, to behave better. They're not being given any skills to be, to think differently. Instead, they're just told, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm evil. And then, why would you want to be anything other than that? So I think that this script of you are evil to your core when we are connecting that to children and how parents are talking to their children, I think it's very destructive because of those, at least those two reasons, is that it's creating victims, people who are not going to be able to speak up, and then also people who are not having empathy or a conscience when they do harm other people. So I think that's a perfect storm for and why we're seeing so much abuse in evangelical families. Because parents aren't being told by their leaders or teachers, how to help their children understand those sorts of moments. And instead, parents are just kind of short-circuiting all that and going directly to the issue of sin. And it just builds from the moment the kid's born. Because when you're told that toilet paper roll that you unrolled is because you're evil, like you've kind of maxed out your ability to talk to that kid about evil. Like, if that is why I'm going to hell because I unrolled the paper roll, like if I hit someone, if I sexually assault someone, like you don't have percentages or any way to measure those anymore because you already went with the like full blown, this small thing sends you to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, the other stuff is going to send you to hell. That makes sense. But you have no way to scale up or scale down when you talk to that child and help them understand the moment. You already, threw all your eggs into that one basket or moment. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like your identity shapes how you interact with others.
mhm.
And and like and so then that also like not only do you have this issue of the violent punishment with these guys, but you also have the hierarchies between people that get created. And so like I know sometimes this shows up by promoting Christian schools or homeschooling and in various Christian supremacist dynamics and stuff. Then there's like it shows up sometimes as promoting ideas like the stay-at-home daughter movement, where girls grow up and have to stay at home to serve their dads until they get married to serve their husbands. It might show up in talking about slavery as being the perfect scenario. And I'm not making this stuff up. This is all stuff that we've heard from these men that have recently
Hmm.
passed. And so it's like, or it shows up in telling women that they have no biblical basis for leaving abusive marriages. So are there any like patterns that you're noticing or common red flags that we should learn to recognize in these teachings?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, there's a bunch of red flags because I think that what these people are teaching is inherently abusive and destructive. And so, I mean, I don't think there's going to be much that we can take from these teachings. It's not going to be damaging. But I think the things that can really clue us into some of what's going on, there's a few things. I think the first would be uh, when you are hearing parenting teachers talk about parental rights and children being, quote unquote, mine to do with as I please or want or think is necessary. Um, I think parental rights is a red flag because this is communicating an issue of ownership. Um, Parental rights, the current parental rights movement originated with evangelical homeschoolers. And for evangelical homeschoolers, like the relationship between an adult and a child is one of property, essentially. Um, they might not say it so crudely. Oftentimes, evangelical parenting teachers will say that, you know, God owns everyone, and parents are given their children temporarily until they turn 18 or until they get married and leave the house. So in a sense, parents don't like own their children. But they should have all legal authority and power over their children. They're kind of on loan from God. So essentially, that most of these teachers would say that children are, if not property, then akin to like rental property. And I think the ownership perspective is inherently dehumanizing. Children are not property, they are human beings. And so if you approach parenting or if you're teaching people to think about children in terms of ownership or property or something that is not a human who has agency and power, that's going to set up those families and the families in those communities to have a culture where abuse can thrive. Another red flag would be talk about the sanctity and the sovereignty of the family. As a child protection professional, I think that families are really important. They do serve functions. All the best social research we have shows that, stable, well-resourced families are very essential to children's well-being. But at the same time, families are also the sites where the majority of child abuse occurs. So there's nothing really, they're important, but they're not sacred. There's nothing that makes them inherently good or holy or protective of children. Like if you want to have a healthy family or a safe family, then that needs to be something that is worked on. It's not just guaranteed. So if you hear a lot of talk from teachers or from parents about, the family being sacred, what that's really saying is that they don't want the government to interfere in their affairs. And to me, that's a huge red flag. Like, why would I be afraid and suspicious of someone making sure I'm not abusing my kids if I'm actually not doing something that's inappropriate? So, as important as the family is, and I think that there absolutely can be government overreach into families, especially if those families are, immigrant families or queer families, families of color. But despite all of that, the family is not something that should be invincible and unable to access by people that need to act to make sure that everyone is being protected, whether that's the children or the woman in the family. The third red flag, I think, would be talking about needing to train children. Children in evangelical spaces are not just supposed to be parented, they're supposed to be trained. It goes back to that verse in the Hebrew Bible about train up a child in the way he should go, and they won't depart from it. For most evangelical parenting teachers, training is a very specific thing. It's a regimen of discipline and corporal punishment that begins when the child's an infant. And you build on it, and it gets more complicated and more moves away from corporal punishment and more into like talking to the child as the child gets older. But the whole purpose of this training is to get the child's will in alignment with the parents, because remember, the child is sinful and evil. That's what we were talking about earlier. Evangelicals believe that from birth, children's wills are not just imperfect, they are actively sinful, actively wanting evil and destruction. Some of these teachers, like Baucham, they say that if children were the size of an adult, they would kill their parents. That's why they're called vipers and diapers by these folks. So since the child is inherently evil and inherently wanting to do bad things, these teachers are emphasizing training, because if you don't train your kid, if you don't spank them, if you don't make them afraid of being a criminal or ending up in hell, then they're going to end up there. And so this training becomes not just trying to help children grow and learn and become good people. It is something that is very much based in this very strong fear that if I don't do parenting this way, as this person tells me, then my child could end up, they specifically say, like, it could be a murderer or a rapist. Michael and Debbie Pearl say that if you don't hit your kids, they're going to end up being Nazis. Like, and the worst things you could think of that parents' fears could go to, like, that's what they say will happen. So I think those are kind of the big red flags. And I think for me, they all come down to beliefs or practices that are not respecting the fact that children are their own people with their own thoughts and questions and their own agency, and instead treating them as something that belongs to their parents.
As people could imagine, living in that environment where you've got all of those fears and threats, it can be kind of intense. And I saw that you recently posted that one of the things you do is that you train election workers to safely de-escalate situations. And you mentioned that you think those are life skills that everyone should learn. So, like, if there was some way for you to communicate in an appropriate way to a child from an evangelical family, like knowing the intensity that they're likely feeling, like what you wish they would know, what would you want to communicate to that child to equip them to de-escalate the intensity of the violent theologies and threats of their parents? Or is there really anything you can say?
Okay, so this was your best question, I thought, but it was also the most difficult question. So I think it's a really good question because it highlights that children, even when they're young, they have some agency and power to impact the world around them, to impact their siblings, their parents, the people in their communities. Children, even in the worst situations, they never stop being a human being, and so they never stop having some agency and power. So I think that's an important thing that we often overlook. So in a sense, like, yes, I could equip and empower children to de-escalate and to be active bystanders in their families. Like, there are tools and skills that we could give children, and I think we should, because they're life skills. So I think that's absolutely an important thing. Children are capable of learning how to communicate well, how to help people around them, calm down and have a conversation about what's really going on inside them. So I think that can be done. Now, the reason why this is a difficult question at the same time is that I don't want to equip and empower children to do that. And I don't mean that I don't want children to have tools to navigate the lives that they live. Absolutely. I mean, they need those. But de-escalating and being an active bystander in a moment of family violence, like, I think that that should not be the child's responsibility. That should be fully on adults. So I would rather, that we spend time and resources on educating adults how to see family violence, how to step in, how to intervene, and how to help children. Because I think that that responsibility should fully be on the adults and children's lives. I think of this as like a question of similar to like teaching girls and women about self-defense. Uh, that sadly is a needed lesson in many circumstances today. But at the same time, we all know that like we should be teaching boys and men not to assault women. We shouldn't be putting the responsibility on women to protect themselves. So, but having said all that, like, I do think that there are things that we can learn to help bring the temperature down when we do encounter people in our lives who are authoritarian or abusive because they are angry or fearful about something else in their lives. That is something I think we all need to. It would be good if we learned how to do it. I think the even more important part there is the active bystander part, which is that when we see someone being hurt, whether that's with words or with physical violence or some sort of emotional abuse, like we should be stepping into those moments. A lot of people are afraid to do that. I mean, that's why there's the bystander effect, which is that most bystanders will not intervene in if they see someone being harmed. I don't know why that is, but it's a very true thing. And so people actually have to learn how to be active bystanders so they know what to do, so they don't feel paralyzed in those. And a lot of those skills have to do, it's not about like countering violence with other violence. It's finding creative ways to bring the temperature down or redirect energy. So, if you're out at a mall or a supermarket or a restaurant and you see someone that's like attacking someone in a racist way, the first thing you're supposed to do is not approach the person doing the attacking. You're supposed to approach the person that is being harmed and check in with them and make sure they're doing okay. And by establishing that relationship with that person, you break kind of the power that the harasser has on the circumstance itself. And it can help other people kind of wake up and be, oh, maybe I should be doing something too. So I think that would be the thing that I'd want to focus on the most, whether it's with kids or adults. With adults, I'd really want them to think about how they can do that when they see parents treating their children in inappropriate ways, like being hit, being like screamed at the supermarket. Like, a lot of people are afraid to intervene in those moments because they don't want to critique a parent. But I think that what active bystander training teaches us is that there are other ways we could address that situation that would help disrupt the moment, but not make the parent feel worse or attacked, because then they might, retaliate in an even worse way.
Mm-hmm. So you're known as a child liberation theologian, and as we wrap this conversation up, what is child liberation theology, and how does it liberate children from the dynamics we've been discussing? And are there any resources that you might recommend for Christian parents that would be healthier than the resources they're currently going to?
Yeah, so child liberation theology, I'd say there's two sides. There's an adult side and then there's a child side. The adult side is that adults learning how we have created obstacles, how we've created a world that is that excludes children, that does not include them, does not include their voices, their thoughts, their ideas, their leadership. There's so much that we as adults have done for centuries that are excluding children or harming children. And so child liberation theology is a call to us as adults that we need to change our ways. We have to create communities in our, in our churches, in our schools, even in our government, where there's space for children to be seen and heard as fully human. The child side of child liberation theology is giving children the skills they need, equipping and empowering children so that they can engage, first and foremost, God and the Bible and their faith community, but also, non-religious parts of their world as well. It's equipping and empowering children to engage those things on their own terms and with their own priorities, creating space for those children to start doing those things that we as adults have been preventing or excluding them from doing. So, the core assumption of child liberation theology is that, as I've said, children are fully human, and that they also have, human rights to protection and agency. Like for me, child liberation theology comes down to what Jesus said when he said that the kingdom of God belongs to children. And I think that statement really gets to the heart of how this theology also challenges evangelical parenting, because when you think about the phrase that God's kingdom belongs to children, like there's a lot of different ways that that could have been expressed. Like it could have been said that the children, or that the kingdom serves the children. The kingdom exists to make children's lives better. Like it exists to protect children, to love children. All these different things that are not really controversial. But that's not what it says. The kingdom belongs. Like this is their kingdom. In my mind, that's God saying, like, I'm giving the keys to the children. This is theirs. And so that, I think, stands in diametric opposition to all of evangelical parenting, because in evangelical parenting, children should not have the ability to lead or to control adults. I mean, leadership and authority and power are things only for adults. Like children are supposed to follow. They're supposed to be submissive. They're supposed to conform, be seen, not heard, those sorts of things. And so when you start to introduce the idea that no, children, they shouldn't just be loved or protected, like they should be at the front of our social movements. They should be, we should be seeking how we run our communities, our churches, our local governments, those sorts of things. And so all of those would challenge, I think, that core idea for evangelical parenting, which is that families run best when authority is with the adults, especially the father.
Mm-hmm.
You also asked for some recommended resources, and I can certainly give you a few. Two great books came out this year or are coming out. One is The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, and that is by Marissa Burt and Kelsey McGinnis. I think it comes out in a few weeks, but you can pre-order. They have their launch team going. That's a great book that kind of surveys the history of evangelical parenting and looks at like the common themes that make up that belief system, and looking at how children who were raised under those beliefs ended up. So it's a great, really great book. I have the honor of endorsing it. It's not just an expert survey of evangelicalism. It also, there's a lot of interviews with children who were raised with these beliefs, as well as, I think this is the greatest part, interviews with the children of the teachers themselves. So you get to see not just how these teachings impacted families all around the country, you get to see how they impacted the children of the teachers themselves when they tried to put their own ideas into practice, because it didn't go well either. And I think that's a really important thing for other parents to see, is that if you follow these teachings and you end up with children who are, feel broken, or children who feel alienated from you, like you didn't do something wrong. You did what the teacher said to do. It's just that they gave you really bad advice. And you're not alone in that. I think that's important to know. Like, even they couldn't do it, the teachers themselves. Another great book would be Households of Faith by Emily Hunter McGowan. This book kind of presents like an alternative vision of what families can be. The book isn't like a how-to guide. It's not, saying you have to do things this one way. It's kind of more of how do you approach this? What is the attitude or spirit with which you approach family? And her book, I think, is kind of a breath of fresh air in the whole religious parenting world, in that it starts with the assumption that children are fully human and have rights. The last book I'll recommend would be Parenting Forward, and that's by Cindy Wong Brandt. And that is a great book for if you're wanting to learn how to parent in a way that's not like the fundamentalism you grew up with. Cindy started a great group online called Raising Children Unfundamentalist. And her book has it's a very practical book that just addresses different parenting issues that are common. And then she gives her thoughts and advice on how to reframe the situation or approach it from a different angle than what maybe we grew up with.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of us, we carry these wounds with us for so many years, and they set patterns in our lives that so many of us aren't even aware of, going back to the harmful things that we experienced or heard about ourselves as kids. So I appreciate the work you do, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
That's all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.